Just going around and around. Ah, okay, we're live.
Hilda,
hello.
We need you to come on.
You can't see me?
Hilda.
Huh. I'm on, I thought.
Hilda, we need you to turn your video on and your mic on. Yes? There you are. Okay. Now your mic.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. It's weird because it was on. It said it was on, but anyway.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody.
Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Writing Difficult Topics and Taboo Topics in middle grade. And we're going to give it a couple minutes for people to sign in. And but in the meantime, maybe you can tell us where you're from. We've got 17 people aboard. Where are you from? And we'd like to see on the chat if that's okay. Send us a little note as to where you're coming from. 19 people. This is good. This is really good.
20.
That's good.
Yeah, we have 58 registered. So
from Kentucky. All right.
Harlem, Rhode Island,
Pacific Northwest,
Linden, New Jersey.
Yeah, Brooklyn,
Rochester, Charlotte, North Carolina, suburban Maryland, Florida. Beautiful. Yeah, we've got people from all over.
Welcome. London. All right. Is it like super late over there, or is it just the evening? All right. Fantastic. All right. Well, we've got a good group. Angie from Hawaii. Across another pond.
Yeah. Yeah, we have people from everywhere.
Michigan. Que lindo. All right. Well, welcome everybody. So before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to ground us and pay our respects to the many people who are losing their lives and who've lost their lives and are suffering in the world right now because of this pandemic. And I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the many people who started off in difficult situations, and their situations are made even worse because of it, because now they're homebound, and those who are houseless or in any number of situations. But I just wanted to acknowledge them and just actually really just say, ground us in gratitude for us as storytellers, because our role is to provide light and to provide meaning and healing, and so my wish is for wellness and for safety and for joy for all beings, and for Mother Earth, and I hope that our work continues to help in the healing.
Thank you for saying that, Aida. And we also need to remember all those people that are still out there working in the grocery stores and delivering our food and everything. And hopefully they'll all be fine and they won't get sick. Yeah. So thank you.
Absolutely. So I also wanted to acknowledge that I'm on Ohlone land in Oakland, California, and that if you know the original inhabitants of where you are now, and please just take a moment and acknowledge the first people and the first caretakers of where you call home. All right. Okay. All right. So my name is Aida Salazar, and I am the author of this book here, The Moon Within, which came out last year in 2019, February of 2019. And I am the author of the upcoming book, Land of the Cranes, which will be out in September. And believe it or not, both of these books are about taboo and difficult topics, and it's part of the reason why I wanted to do this webinar. So The Moon Within, I wrote it because my daughter was coming of age, and she was asking all sorts of questions about her body, about her evolution into womanhood, and I wanted to provide a mirror book. I wanted to make sure that she, as a Latina, could see herself and her experience reflected in a book. And then when I went to sell the book and we were looking for comps, we couldn't find any books that were similar. That really nobody had written about menstruation in a novel form and centered menstruation for about 50 years. And that's since Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And so the book kind of became the themes in the book about menstruation, about finding your power, about the gender expansive character also kind of blossoming and having a community come around and support this character. All of those things became even more kind of heightened, and I started to think, well, why is that? Why haven't we had a book in 50 years to talk about menstruation? And it was clear that it was because of patriarchy, because our menstruations and our bodies are relegated to shame and secrecy and disgust, and I think we've internalized that, and so we call it the rag, and the amp flow, and all of these kind of derogatory terms, and we haven't kind of experienced and had the opportunity to find the kind of profound nature and beautiful nature of what that experience is. And so when I wrote The Moon Within, it gave it a different meaning, and I realized that it was a taboo, and so it's one of many now, not many, but we've got a few coming down the pike. There's a few now out. I think there's a graphic novel and a couple other books that are coming out about menstruation. I think it's kind of opening the breaking down the taboo, right? And then I wrote The Land of the Cranes for an entirely different reason. Land of the Cranes is about a little girl who's inside a detention center, and she writes picture poems to her dad, who's been deported to Mexico. And so this story, I wrote it when during a time where the sanctuary cities under the Trump administration were being attacked, retaliated against, because as you know, the Trump administration was having, their whole platform was anti-immigrant and anti-Latinx immigrant in particular, and Muslim immigrant. But they were going at the ICE was coming into communities and was just raiding, taking people right off the street. And where I live in Oakland, our mayor at one point alerted the community publicly that ICE was in the area and to please be careful. And she made national news. I think the Trump administration actually tried to sue her. And so that was happening when I wrote Land of the Cranes. And also there was during that time, there was a couple of who was on their way about 5-6 a.m. in the morning. They were on their way to pick in the fields. They were migrant farm workers. They got chased by ICE, and they crashed their car, and they both died, and they left 6 citizens, 6 children as orphans. And that was the climate in which I wrote Land of the Cranes, because I am formally undocumented, and though I'm now a citizen, it is my community, and it is something that I know pretty intimately. And it wasn't until like 6 months later, when the whole world world's eyes turned to the separation of children from their parents at the border, that it became a kind of a little more known. And so this is not a book that was torn from the headlines, as so to speak. It was a book that came from my experience and my own personal kind of understanding of what it is to be a migrant in the United States, an immigrant in the United States. And so those are my two books. And Hilda, maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us about your books.
All right. Well, thank you, Aida, and I look forward to reading The Land of the Cranes, and I love The Moon Within. And thank you for coming up with this topic and allowing me to be a part of it also. This is my book, Ana Maria Reyes Does Not Live in a Castle, and it came out in October of 2018. I don't really think of this book as having, taboo topics. It's about it's about socioeconomic inequality, and there's one character in it, Ana Maria's uncle, who is an alcoholic. And when I was reading a review of my book, and it was a very positive review, but one of the things that the reviewer said was, oh, parents might want to know that there is, alcohol abuse, and he gets behind the wheel of a car and he hits somebody, and so there's violence. And so this reviewer was saying, parents, watch out for this one thing in this book. And I thought, oh, well, that's sort of interesting that they would think that. And my second book which won't come out until next year, is actually about domestic violence. And I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and she's read this book already. And she said, wow, your books aren't really about children's topics. I can't believe these are children's books. And it really underscores the fact that for creators of middle grade fiction, to get to our readers, we have to get through the gatekeepers, the adult gatekeepers first. And those gatekeepers can have some very strong ideas about what children should and should not be reading. And they might try to keep certain topics away from children, even if children have already experienced those things or might be interested in them. Like Aida, I know that you've had some situations with The Moon Within where you've had adult gatekeepers trying to keep your book away from children, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it wasn't necessary. Well, I don't know if they're actively doing that, but I went to this bilingual conference, and I was sitting with a bunch of in a round table with lots of educators, and and the majority of them said that they could not teach my book in their classroom. They said that teachers were too burdened with their workloads to take on a controversial book, and that they would be fighting school boards, they would be fighting parents, and they just they would have to separate children like by gender, by binary gender of all things, and that they would have to send permission slips home, and it would be just too much work. But they each knew a child that the book would be good for. So they bought the book for one child, but they wouldn't bring it into the classroom. So, and this is kind of like a silent censoring of my book. And there've been critics, people who clutch their pearls at like, I will not have my child exposed to that. In fact, one family, my sister-in-law gave the book to a family with a young girl, and they gave it back. The mother gave it back, and she's like, I'm not going to give this book to my child because it's about sex. And so,
Wow.
there are these experiences. And Judy Blume, when she wrote Forever and Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, had death threats. And she had to have a bodyguard, accompany her to the different events because people were that upset by what she was writing. And what she was writing is, I think, just the truth, right?
Yeah, and it's not just the truth, it's what kids are actually experiencing. So, what really is the problem here,
Yeah.
And these adults acknowledge that these books address important topics and that many middle grade children will relate to them and need them. But for some reason, there's a fear of exposing kids to the real world too soon or something.
Yeah, well, I think that if we look at what a taboo means, right? If we look at taboo means a social or religious custom prohibiting or forbidding discussions of a particular practice, right? These taboos exist, but also difficult topics exist. And I think when we're talking about middle grade authors, um, as middle grade authors and middle grade readers, we have like this kind of unspoken Hippocratic oath, right? Like to do no harm, right? That our books have to have a silver lining for middle grade. We have to provide hope and levity and all of these different techniques, which we're going to go over in a little bit. But ultimately, our books cannot harm children, right? Because they're exquisitely vulnerable at this time, right? We're talking about ages 8 to 12 years old, and so formative. And but what do but like you said, Hilda, these things exist, right? And so we have to, I think, lean in, and we roll up our sleeves. We try to be empathetic, and brave, also brave for our readers, because they do experience these things, and we have to do our due diligence and write conscientiously and skillfully, and create art ultimately, right? So I
Yeah.
think our stories say, I see you, right? I hear you, I understand you, I'm here for you, right? These are the things that kind of drive our books when we're talking about difficult taboo topics. But then, of course, they're on the flip side. There are children who don't need the support, who don't have that experience, right? But what happens when they read our books, right? And I think that they'll gain understanding and empathy,
Yeah.
right? It prepares them as readers, as people, to find answers, or to prepare themselves for the world which is not spoken about to them, because
Mhm.
these gatekeepers kind of keep these ideas from them.
Yeah.
And
And it's interesting because when I was a kid, like one of the things that I have said about my book is that I wanted to write a book that I would have wanted to read as a kid, a book that's about a child who's similar to me and who's growing up in the neighborhood where I grew up, with the kind of family that I grew up with. But at the same time, so when I was a kid, there weren't books like that, and that was a long time ago. But
mhm,
still, I enjoyed books about kids that were different from me, and I enjoyed and I think it helped me grow as a person to learn about people that are different from me. And so, so the idea that, that not all kids need these books, I don't know that that's really a good thing to say, because I think we all need these books, but especially the kids who are already experiencing them. And it's funny, I'm
mhm.
looking over here at some of the comments and I see that Kathleen says, when I was in 6th grade, every girl in my class read, "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret." We had one book from the school library that we passed around.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, obviously it was, and I remember reading that book too. And yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know any woman who doesn't remember reading that book. And yet she
Mhm.
was getting death threats. It's just insane. And
It
yet
is.
and for some reason there weren't, until your book, there haven't been more about that topic, which it just sounds crazy when you think about it,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that from the white feminist movement has done a lot to kind of open up conversations about menstruation in the white feminist world, but we haven't heard these stories from people of color, and we are lucky that we were able to sell an anthology called Calling the Moon, writings on menstruation by middle grade authors of color. Hilda, you're in that book, right? And in that
Yeah.
anthology, and that's going to be coming out in 2022. So we're insisting over here. We're insisting.
Yeah, it's an
Hilda,
important
do you
topic.
want to talk a little bit about your, just quickly? You kind of didn't talk about your upcoming book, which I think is really important to set a context about for what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, my upcoming book, the title is Miosotis Flores Never Forgets, and it's about a young girl who has an older sister who she realizes is in an abusive relationship. And it's interesting because the book was not, I didn't really, from the very beginning, I knew that that was sort of what it was going to be about, but it's more about Miosotis becoming more more in tune with other people and looking, and she was always, because she has an older sister, and also she's, another topic in the book is that, you know, her mother died when she was born, and there are a lot of women of color die from childbirth related issues, and so that's another issue that I address in the book. So yeah, so I mean the book talks about domestic violence, racism, colorism, um, and you know, but all of those are issues that are, that kids see every day and that they deal with and they have to live with.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so that's my second book, which is much more of a taboo topic than anything that happens in Ana Maria. But Ana Maria also is, you know, in terms of issues of you know, socioeconomic disparities between people, and also it's about accepting people who are flawed
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that we're all flawed, and also not putting people on a pedestal when it looks like they've got everything together, but in recognizing that we all have issues. And so that was really sort of the purpose of the book. And in terms of introducing topics that might be considered difficult or taboo, my purpose in doing that was just that that's real life. And if you're going to talk about the things that kids are experiencing, especially maybe children of color, then you're going to have to introduce some of these topics because they're out there, they're in the world, and kids are
Mm-hmm.
seeing them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
so here we have actually a really cool presentation, and I mean, some slides to share with you because we've listed, we brainstormed a little bit about all the kind of different um, books that we can, you know, all the different taboo topics or the difficult taboo topics, and we have um, gender and sexuality, sex and sexual awakening, consent, sexual harassment, rape and molestation, sexism, racism, self-harm, suicide, cutting, etc., mental health, substance abuse and addiction, domestic and societal violence, family death or separation, and God forbid, menstruating puberty. um, so let's just take a look at some of these slides, and these are just some of the books that we've read that that kind of deal with these topics. George is kind of infamous because um, they can't keep censoring this book all over because it's the first story of a child kind of acknowledging their true gender identity, which is, uh, and that's why it's called George. Although George is their dead name, and it should really be Melissa, according to Alex Gino, the author. So, and then Star-Crossed is about uh, two girls who are in a play, and it's a Romeo and Juliet kind of inspired story, but they like one likes the other. And the same with Hurricane Child, also a lesbian relationship. And then The Moon Within has not a gender fluid child that is coming to kind of their own, acknowledging their gender fluidity. Um, yeah, you take the next group. Oh, maybe I'll do this one because I added.
Yeah.
So this is also, this one is P.S. I Miss You. That is by Jen Petroy. And this book got banned like straight up. The sister it gets pregnant and it's sent away. And so it's a series of letters to her sister who's gone. And The Moon Within, again, there's this one poem in The Moon Within where the child is examining her vulva. She's, and it's done through poetic language, and so she calls it her flower, her flor. And in that passage, a friend who's a school teacher recently told me, you know what, that poem is the only reason why I can't teach this book in my classroom, because the girl is talking about her body. And imagine, and this is a feminist Chicana who's very, very progressive, but even the most progressive-minded folks have trouble, right?
Wow.
Um, yeah. But this is the first time we're seeing, the little girl is talking about sexual arousal, being aroused when she sees this boy, and the feelings that she gets in her down there girl parts. And so this is the first time we're seeing it in middle grade. We haven't seen this before. So if you want, there's lots of room to talk more about the body and puberty and sexual awareness and awakening. And then maybe he just likes you. And actually, this one should be under consent. But this is about a girl who gets assaulted at school, and it's like, I think, the first middle grade book about the Me Too movement, in response to the Me Too movement, by Barbara D. So all these three are about sexual harassment, rape, and molestation. Jackie Woodson is kind of the queen of digging right into the wound and talking about it. Yeah, so you should just kind of check out these books. These are some quick ones. And then these are about sexism and patriarchy. Rickshaw Girl, this little girl wants to drive a rickshaw and she can't. And the same with Amal Unbound. Just these very traditional societies, and how girls are trying to break free from the patriarchy. And then we have these books here. You want to talk about these?
Sure. I actually haven't read Genesis Begins Again, although I've heard great
Okay.
things about it. But so you can talk about, but Ghost Boys is written from the point of view of the ghost of a boy who was shot to death by the police, and he meets the ghost of Emmett Till, and there's a lot of, it's just really great. So there's a lot of talk about racism and why they ended up dead. Front Desk is also really great. It's about a girl who comes to the United States with her parents from China, and they manage a motel, and they're, somebody at one point, a car gets stolen, and one of their black patrons gets accused of it for no reason other than that he's black. The Watsons go to Birmingham, 1963, about a family in 1963, obviously, from Michigan, who takes a trip down to Birmingham, Alabama, to visit their grandmother, and they see firsthand some things that they had never seen before, the three kids. Do you want to say what Genesis Begins Again is about?
Yeah. Genesis Begins Again is about colorism, and how the subtleties within, even within communities of color, privilege people who are lighter skinned. And these books, I haven't read, but I read synopsis of these, but they deal with suicide and cutting and farms. And these, I'll talk about See You in the Cosmos. See You in the Cosmos is about a little boy who wants to go build a rocket, and he goes to a rocket conference, and he leaves his mother, who has mental health issues, behind, and he doesn't know that she has mental health issues until he comes back with a string of characters who he met at this conference.
Yeah, and each tiny spark is about a girl who has ADHD, and her father is in the military, and he just comes back from deployment, and she's trying to reconnect with him. She hasn't seen him in a long time, and he obviously has PTSD because he's really struggling to come back with the family and with society. Family Game Night and Other Catastrophes is about a girl whose mother is a hoarder, and she's, just kind of destroying the whole family with her hoarding and buying all the stuff and shoving it all into the house. And the girl is really resisting all of that. So yeah, it was a really good book. Well, these are all really good books.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. So this is substance abuse and addiction.
yeah.
And Sunny Side Up is the brother has an addiction problem, and she's sent away.
Becoming Naomi.
Becoming Naomi.
Yeah, the mom is an alcoholic, and it's that. I actually just reread it last night. I just picked it up to glance at it, and then I couldn't put it down. It was just so good. And like I said, we already talked about, so what's the substance abuse?
There's a drinking, an alcoholic father in Genesis Begins Again.
Okay. And as I mentioned, Ana Maria Reyes has an alcoholic uncle. There's also a character who has a mother who's a drug addict, and leaves the family.
Oh, one. All right. So these are all domestic and societal violence. One for the Murphys and Mockingbird, I think have one for the Murphys, I think, has domestic violence, and I'm not sure about Mockingbird, but the Red Pencil is about war, and the Night Diary as well. And maybe you can talk about the benefits.
The benefits of being an octopus is about domestic violence, more emotional abuse. So it's about a girl whose mother, gets involved with this man who is emotionally abusing her and, making her feel like crap, basically, about herself. So.
Mm-hmm. So family death or separation. There's a lot of, the three are newer. So last year we had Stars Beneath Our Feet, and that's about a brother who his brother was killed, and he's grieving his brother, and he uses Legos as a sort of kind of cathartic healing mechanism. And then Gabby Lost and Found, her mother's been deported, and she's living in her life in the United States without her mom. And then Ephraim Divided is about a boy whose mother also gets deported, and he's trying to get her back, and how he has to step up, in the meantime. And then I'll let you talk about Pie in the Sky, but the Bridge Home is about children who leave domestic violence. They live in India. They leave their home that was not safe, and they live under a bridge, and they find a community with two other children. It's a devastating book, devastating and beautifully written. And then Land of the Cranes is, as you know, it's about family separation as well.
And Pie in the Sky is about two boys who are mourning the death of their father, and they also end up leaving their home. So now they're living in a new country, and the main character, who's a little bit older, is struggling to learn English, and then also struggling with mourning the death of his father.
Yeah. All right. And so this one, of course, menstruation and puberty, and then we've got more, but I didn't put them up. All right. So So that's just kind of a glimpse. But now let's, like, Kate DiCamillo said, "How do you make the unbearable bearable?" Is the question I think that we have as middle grade authors to ask ourselves, right? And we came up with a list of the different strategies that you can use as a writer to to articulate, to make the unbearable bearable. So you wanna start us off with form and POV and
Sure.
genre?
Yes, often because of the seriousness of the subjects, the form in which your novel is delivered helps deepen the exploration of the topic and sometimes helps bring lightness to it or makes it more accessible or makes it a little bit easier, I guess, for kids to read. And, one of these genres is historical fiction, so like if you look at The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, and also, the Gaither sisters books by Rita Williams Garcia, which are also about that time, I think late 60s, early 70s. Chains and that trilogy by Laurie Halsey Anderson about slavery. Just historical fiction helps kids, sort of learn about these topics in a way that's a little bit more distant so that they're not feeling like necessarily they're going to walk out into the street and experience these things, but it helps to learn a little bit more about them. And then, fantasy is another genre, like the Harry Potter books and the Golden Compass, that address some pretty difficult topics when you think about it, but they do it in a fantasy way.
So it
And
creates a sort of distance, a little bit of a distance
right,
between the reader
between the
and the.
reader and what's happening and the painful
Mhm.
things that are happening. It creates a distance, but still they can still relate to it somehow.
Mhm. Mhm. And then, if you think about the Moon Within, the Red Pencil, Land of the Cranes, many of the books that Margarita Engel writes, they're all written in verse. So something I think one of the powers of poetry is that in delivering work in poetry is that you can get very, very close into a close first person. It's like, and that allows access to the deeper layers of meaning. There's this poet called Billy Collins who said, poetry is the history of the human heart. And I love this quote because it really kind of captures, uh, you know, the essence of what poetry does. It kind of goes right into the heart, and all of the veils are removed. Um, and then also another strategy is the epistolary form, right? So the night diary, P.S. I love you, the bridge home. These are all books that write to a character in second person, um, and that is a way also to kind of it's parallel to poetry in that way that it allows you to kind of get really deep and into the personal um, uh, ideas of the main character. Um, and then Sunny Side Up and Pie in the Sky, both of these are graphic novels. That's a way that you can also deliver difficult information in a form that's very relatable to middle grade readers. Um, and then also using magical realism. And one of the things that magical realism from Latin America has taught us is that we can uh, bend reality when reality is too difficult to bear, when reality can hurt you if you publish. In Latin America, certainly in Latin America, people were persecuted because of what they published under certain regimes, and so magical realism kind of became this way of altering reality just enough so that the readers could um, understand what they're really talking about, but disguised in this kind of the altered, realism. So that's another form and genre that you can use. So another way. is language. The language that we use as writers must think really deeply about how the voice. Now, Linda Sue Park, I took a workshop with her, and she said voice is three things. It's word choice, is rhythm, and punctuation, right? And so every character has to deliver your story. How the character delivers the story really matters. It has to strike the right balance. If it's too strong, it runs the risk of shocking, right? And of being censored, right? If it's too out there, especially in middle grade. When you're talking about young adult novels, it's no holds bar. You can write in whatever form or whatever, but we're talking about middle grade readers with a huge amount of gatekeepers between you and your reader. So you have to strike the right balance and make sure you're not censored, and you have to be clear, so that you don't lose the reader entirely. An example of this is The Stars Beneath My Feet, right?
Yes, and one of the things he does is, I know that at the end of the book, he has an author note where he talks about how he used African American vernacular on purpose because, it's important to use slang and to really show us what this kid is like, and to hear his voice and hear how he's experiencing the world, and it's New York, it's Harlem, and and it's now, of course, he recognizes that slang does change over time, but that hopefully this helps kids to really get a good relatable view of Black culture and to really get inside this character. And I think he accomplishes that. I think you can really feel what this character is feeling and understand him, and hear, and his voice sounds very real and very genuine, and that's really great.
Yeah.
So
For sure.
yeah, so another thing that sometimes we do, or we can do, is use humor or levity in order to help offset the difficulty of the subjects. For example, like if you think of the film Life is Beautiful, for instance, about a man who tries to keep the fun of childhood alive for his son while they're in a concentration camp. Obviously, this is not that easy a thing to do, and the writer has to really strike the right balance. I think the writer in Pie in the Sky does that very well. She's able to use, levity, even though it's a very tough subject with this child mourning, the loss of his father, but she's able to do it in a lighthearted way, balancing, the very emotional, sad parts with some humor and some levity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the same with like See You in the Cosmos. That book, the child, because of his innocence, is just sees the world through rose-colored glasses. Literally, I mean, like he doesn't see any harm in the world. He doesn't see the dangers. He doesn't see, and it's devastating as an adult reading the dangers that he walks into, like riding a bus, to Arizona from wherever I can't remember where he comes from, but like that this child is exposing themselves to this danger, but he's like light and happy about it, and he doesn't even realize that his mother is ill, has a mental illness. And he's just trying to be really supportive and very sweet. And so his innocence and his levity about life, which I think is very real for children in this age group, it's really genuine. And I think you could use that. Another a strategy, so to speak, is dialogue, right? So through dialogue, your characters are able to tell each other about their pain and their secrets. It's a powerful strategy because it puts you inside the character's voice, but it also puts you into another's reaction to their situation. Like for instance, in Land of the Cranes, I'm going to read you guys actually a poem. It's a quick poem, but in the one of the things that I couldn't do in Land of the Cranes was ignore the fact that children are molested inside of these detention centers at a very, very high rate. And I needed to bring this to light. And so I chose to have the molestation not happen to my main character, but to a friend. And this is the moment when she tells her. This poem's called The Night, or That Night. I'm going to take my glasses off, could I read? I tried to sleep between Mommy and Yanela. Maybe it's the lightless air, or Mommy's sleeping breaths, or what she said about our hearts. But I get the nerve up to ask Yanela what happened when they took her away from her mother. You don't want to know. I do. It's too terrible to tell. I still want to know, if you want to tell it. Yanela stares at the ceiling, taps her fingers on her chest lightly. She begins to speak softly. I'll tell you because you are my friend now, Betita, because we're cranes. Promise never to say a word to another living soul. Ninguna. I promise. Changuitos que sí. I cross two fingers in a swear above her. She wiggles to the side to whisper near my ear. We were taken to a place that looked like a hospital, but wasn't, with lots of other kids. Babies, too. There was not one of us who didn't cry and cry for our parents at first. I tried to keep at least Jackie with me because she was a girl, but they wouldn't let me. She went with the babies. I stayed with the older girls. Carlos with the boys. They screamed at us to do this and that, rules like here. They gave us shots right on the arm, lots of them, though we'd already got them in El Salvador. They made my arm swell up like a balloon and gave me a fever. But that wasn't the worst. Did they hit you? Not me, but sometimes they hit the kids who tried to run out the doors or cried too loudly. They would scream, "Shut up! Shut up!" But that wasn't the worst. Really? Then Yanela pauses for such a long time I think she's fallen asleep. There was a man who cooked our food, who would lock me in the closet with him. He did things. He told me it was supposed to feel good, but it didn't. It hurt me so, so bad, I threw up. In the closet? Uh-huh, all over him. Then he stopped, so I started making myself sick each time he trapped me. Did you tell the people there? He said if I told anyone, he would make it so that I never saw my mama again. So I didn't tell the grown-ups, but I told all of the kids to run when he came near them. Pobrecita, I begin to say, but the sadness I feel for her gets all tangled inside my voice box with the biggest tears. I'm so, so sorry, Yanela. Shh, Betita, you said you wouldn't say anything. She covers my mouth with her hand. I pull it away and give it a little squeeze and nod and let the tears roll down for Yanela, but also to imagine what would happen if I was ever taken away from Mommy. That night, there are more coughs than normal, more cries, more sighs, our fear a bear roaring in the dark.
Well, thank you. That was very moving. Thank you.
So that is a description of how language and dialogue can act as a way to deliver really difficult information. And as I was trying to contemplate doing this, I was asking people, and I asked a friend, and he told me that there's a study that I don't know where to cite it. I wish I did. I probably should have asked before I mentioned it. But he said that there was a study done where children who are survivors of sexual assault saw their reality reflected on the page, and they immediately recognized what was going down, even though some of the language is coded. But but that children who had not had that experience, it totally went over their heads. Like they didn't even, it didn't hurt them. And so I think that when we're talking about delivering this kind of information, this difficult information to readers, it's critical for there to be a mirror, for there to be a witness also, that what they've experienced is true and it is worth hurting about, and not not silencing. And then at the same time, those even the readers that it may or may not go over their heads, they will figure out that there is this kind of suffering in the world, and hopefully will gain compassion and empathy around it. Yeah, so but there's also other strategies, right? Like Ghost Boys, right?
Well, Ghost Boys also uses dialogue between the ghosts, between the ghost boys, and that is done in a very powerful way as well. And I guess one of the other strategies, which I'm not sure that I'd call this a strategy, it's more a necessary element of all of these books, is agency. Making sure that the character gains a set of tools or strategies to help them deal with the situation they're facing. And it's an especially important element in writing about taboo or difficult topics, because in addition to displaying the questions and the pain of the characters, we also need to include important ways by which children can lift themselves up and find hope and empowerment and understanding. Pretty much, I would say that all of the books that we listed on there do that. One of the examples, obviously I definitely try to do that in Ana Maria, where, she definitely learns a lot from some of the difficult things that she sees. And, Family Game Night and Other Catastrophes, for instance, she, the girl who's the main character has very, very negative feelings towards her mother, who's a hoarder. And, with time, she sort of comes to see that she's sort of the opposite of her mother, where she can't have anything in her room. Her room is 100% clean and neat. And if her mother tries to sneak anything in there, she throws it out the window. And, her grandmother, I think, helps her to see, well, you're a little bit like your mother, because it's about control. And it's about learning to be and it's about having to be in control. And that's one of the things that she's doing also. So, she learned something through the story that's told in the book. And that's a very important part of every book, especially a middle grade book, is that you need to have some agency in the children. And like I said, all these books, I think, have that.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, like for that poem, one expert that I spoke to about around sexual molestation and assault in children told me that it couldn't just be a telling. The child needed to have agency. Like they needed to be able to say, like, no, I couldn't tell the adults, but I could tell the other kids. And that, provides that agency, which is so critical for middle grade.
And it's not like it's not like as the readers we're just seeing it happen. Where her being able to tell the story is a part of the story as well, and is a part of her agency and her growth. Yeah,
for sure. All right. So, and then we have situations where you can write the difficult aspects or the hurtful things off the page, right? Like, so the action or the trauma happens to somebody else in the family or in the community, or happens, like in Gabby Lost and Found, the mother's already been deported. In Hurricane Child, same, right? The child has her mother has disappeared, and so these difficult things happen outside of them. And I think in yours too, right? There's a teenage, or is that, am I confusing with?
Yeah, no, there's a teenager who is pregnant in my book, and she's not a main character, but she's part of the story, and that is something that happens. So it was sort of interesting because when I read that one review where they, were warning parents about the drunk uncle, I thought, oh well, they didn't mention the pregnant teenager. I guess that's good. And she's also the character who has the mother who's a drug addict, and my character doesn't really see that, but she hears about her, and the fact that her friend can tell her about her mother and her issues with her is, again, sort of part of the character's agency. So yeah, and there's a lot of dialogue in that.
Right.
So what's next?
Author's note and contextualization is another way, another place.
Yeah, because, sometimes, even though it's a wonderful story and beautifully executed, it may not be enough, and the author's note might be an opportunity to give the reader historical information, useful facts, resources. Like in Front Desk, for instance, I remember that she provides an author's note and tells us what parts of the story came from her real life and how those events helped to shape her and form her and the way she felt about it. And that was, pretty powerful. And I think that a lot of kids could really relate to some of those feelings. And I know, so you have an author's note in Land of the Cranes, right, Aida?
In both, actually. In The Moon Within, I have an author's note, and then I've got other offerings on top of that. So in the back, I have a moon calendar. So another way for children to kind of gain agency is to have a resource like this, and they get to follow, and you don't have to bleed. You could just follow how you feel and how your body feels, because we're all connected to the pulling tides of the moon's power to pull tides and water, and we're so much water, and so that's the argument there. But and in Land of the Cranes, man, that author's note was so critical because of the context, and also because I wrote my author's note in December, just recently in December, and then I had to rewrite my author's note after American Dirt. And if you don't know what American Dirt is this book who wrote about a woman's migrating experience to the United States, and it's been called a narco thriller. I haven't read it, but it's been called a narco thriller, and I've read really intelligent and insightful reviews, and basically they said that this woman just used migrant pain to get money, and I believe she got $7 million advance for that.
That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, I've read a lot of negative reviews. So I don't plan to read the book.
So no. So anyway, so I rewrote my author's note given that context, given not to defend my book, but yes, in some ways to kind of like state my authority as and my the reasons why I feel to write. All right, we're going to be able to open this up for questions in a little bit.
We've been, it's been over an hour, has it? So okay, so let's just, I guess we can try to sort of wrap it up a little bit and then open it up for questions. So one thing, I guess, in terms of opening it up for questions is that I imagine that a lot of the people on this webinar are writers, and that, you know, they might be thinking, I want to write about a specific topic that I think might be considered taboo or difficult, but I'm afraid that it won't get published. And, you know, just to let you know, when I pitched my domestic violence story to my editor, you know, they immediately snapped it up, and they didn't think, at first I was worried that she might say, oh no, this is not a middle grade, maybe you can make it YA or something like that, but they didn't say that. So it can be done. And obviously you can see from all the mentor text we've shown you that it can be done, you know, but you need to ask yourselves a bunch of questions before you start writing a book like this. And so,
and that is,
yeah, first, what is your motivation to write this taboo topic? And, you know, please don't say it's to be trendy or cutting edge. And this is a question for you, so dig deep, journal it, write about it. I don't know if you want to say anything more about this. I think we're...
Yeah, I think that this is, you know, you can have, think about what your motivation is. Like, you know, is it your intention to open up a conversation? Is it to shed light on a subject that hasn't been talked about? You know, yeah. So this is just something for you to kind of think about. But when we say please don't do it to be trendy or cutting edge, you know, because remember your responsibility to, or your unspoken Hippocratic oath when you're writing middle grade, right? That you're not, you can't do harm, right? We don't want to do harm, because this our readership is so vulnerable.
Right.
So what purpose does your writing this story serve middle grade readers? And this question, I recently at the Quelly conference, Linda Park gave a keynote, and she talked about this story about this little boy who had waited in the lining sign for an hour and was the last person to come up. And when he came up, he came up with a tattered book of hers to sign. And he said that he had written that book, I read that book 50 times. And she said that she realized at that moment that she needed to be in service to the story, but then also in service to the reader. Because they are going to live with this once or twice or many times. And so if you don't think about your reader, especially in middle grade, if you don't think about your reader, if you don't think about the resonance that your words are going to carry, then it's a failure of your craft. I think. And so that wasn't what she said about the failure of the craft. That's what I say. But anyway, so I thought that was a really powerful thing. What you know, so think about that. This is a good question to ask yourself.
And are you putting children's pain on display just for the sake of it? You know, so the answer to that should be no.
Yeah.
Is you don't want to do that.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that, like, well, if we look at this is something that I learned from journalists, immigration journalists in particular, like Aura Bogado and Tina Vasquez and Roberto Lovato. These three immigration journalists started critiquing when the children were being separated at the border, when that crisis was at its peak. There were journalists coming out of the woodwork all of a sudden writing about immigration, but they were just
sensationalizing,
sharing sensationalizing it and using the images of a floating father and mother, a baby girl wrapped in their t-shirt, and not giving any context, not giving them an agency, just showing that picture without showing their humanity, but just their brutalization. And so when I wrote Land of the Cranes, I was very critical of myself, to make sure that what I was displaying is, it wasn't just for the sake of displaying this very difficult and painful experience, but that it had some kind of hope and some kind of agency, and that the child had power. And in my book, without giving too much away, she writes picture poems, and that's the way that she kind of finds her agency and finds light within that. So it's really important. Oh, also there it is.
Yeah, does your character gain empathy, agency, growth through their discoveries or their suffering? And that's something we've already talked about, how that's very important. And I think, all of the mentor books that we've listed, the answer is yes, the character definitely does. And that's something that you need to make sure that you have in your stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Is your reader able to go on this journey with your characters and find the same transformation? So that's really important, because again, it goes back to this question of you serving your reader, right? We want to be able to have them gain something from the book.
Right. Is this your story to tell?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know enough about the subject to render it not only with authority, but with authenticity and compassion? And, that's the whole American Dirt issue,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
for sure. For
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So you need to make sure that you know what you're talking about, and that, you're telling the story for all the right reasons. You're not just taking somebody else's story and putting it on display, to sensationalize. So this sort of encapsulates a lot of the other questions in here as well. Right?
Yeah, because and quite frankly, compassion is not enough.
Right. Yeah, because
It's
you
not
need,
enough to feel
yeah.
like feeling compassion for a certain issue or a certain situation or something that you read in the newspaper. It's not enough. You have to be able to dig deep and use all of these skills, the dialogue, the language, the point of view, the genre. All of these things are your toolbox to be able to render a story with skill, with sensitivity and compassion. And again, I would say that it's a failure of your craft if you, like American Dirt, render a book that she had the best intentions with, right? And it wasn't her story to tell. I don't think. Although there's an argument that oh, you can write whatever you want. Yes, you can write whatever you want, but is it your story to tell? Right? That's actually oh gosh, I'm forgetting her name right now. The author of Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. Do you remember her name?
I don't remember.
Oh God. But
Yeah.
anyway, so she said, yes, you can write whatever you want, but is it your story to tell? And I think that that's a very important question, because if it isn't, then Graceland, yes, thank you.
Right. Thanks.
But yeah, because if you don't render it with authority, then you're it's a failure of your craft.
Right.
You haven't done your homework. You haven't spent the time necessary to get inside the characters, to get inside that world, to understand the complexities of that difficult or taboo topic enough to make it a transformational and agency acquiring experience for your reader. So I think that was it, right? Oh, this is an awesome quote. One of my favorite quotes ever.
Yeah. Huh. It's funny. I can't really see it now because our faces are in front of it, but sexual abuse happens. Parents leave. These things happen every day. And people think that if they don't talk about it, then it will just go away. But that's what makes it spread like the plague it is. People say that they're censoring in the guise of protecting children, but if they'd open their eyes, they'd see that kids are exposed to this stuff every day, and we need a venue by which to talk to them about it and start a dialogue. My writing comes from this place of wanting to change the world. I feel like young people are the most open. So that's the great Jacqueline Woodson.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That is, so that, we'll leave you with that quote for you to kind of contemplate. And I think that that's the exact reason why I write difficult subjects. And I don't mean to set out to write difficult subjects. Like I'm like going, what can I write? What difficult subject can I write? But both of these grew organically from who I am. But once they were with me, I take the responsibility very, very seriously, and I have to champion them, in that way, with that kind of integrity. So why don't we open it up for questions and see what you got? Anybody?
I think we already had a few questions. Let me scroll down.
Go back?
I think.
Right, let's go back.
Let's see how far back we should go. I think Carla's question.
Okay, Carla has a question.
Sorry if I missed this. If you address this, please skip. How do you decide? How do you know when to leave something for YA versus middle grade? I'm not sure. I mean,
well, no. You can write it in middle grade. I would say, David Levithan said in his article I read about taboo topics, he says there's no such thing as a taboo topic in middle grade anymore. You can write, all of it, because everything's kind of sort of been written about, well, except for menstruation, but now we're seeing more of it. But like everything's been written about, but it's the way that you write.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a critical difference.
Yeah, because I think, in YA, there are definitely no rules. You can curse, you can, be a little bit more graphic if you're going to talk about sexual issues. YA is very similar to adult books. Whereas with middle grade, you do need to consider things. But in terms of the topics, I don't know that that there's anything that you can't write about in middle grade in terms of the actual topic. It's just how you do it.
Yeah.
So this other question, although school book lists may avoid controversial books, do you find your book shared or promoted well in other platforms like libraries, book fairs, etc.? I mean, I think that's a question for you, Aida. I mean, I think
well, librarians also censored it, they do.
Yeah.
They do, and it's subtle censorship because they don't, turn out my book. They don't, they have supported it, and they will put, like, the books will be in the classroom library, like one copy in the classroom library, or a classroom library or in a library. But I don't do school visits. I get asked to do school visits because at libraries, I think I've had like maybe 3 library talks, and that's about it. So, if you are writing on a subject that is difficult, be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for the backlash. You have to be prepared for the censorship, and it might just be silent censorship. And so
yeah, and hopefully it's temporary, and hopefully as with time, as people sort of grow up, that censorship will go away. I guess that's what we can hope for.
And but I do have to say that my book got a lot of love despite that. So it was on the New York Public Library it was like on 10 different best of the year books lists, and it won an International Latino Book Award. It won a Nerdy Book Award. It won a verse novel award from NCTE. So it's gotten uh, love by certain gatekeepers, but then, you know, but they're not people who are working directly with children. Even in my own publishing house, I would say, like Scholastic would not do an audiobook of my book. And the
Oh.
reason why,
Hmm.
yeah, I know they wouldn't do that because they said that audiobooks are listened to as a family often, like in the car or whatever, and they felt like it was not appropriate for family read aloud.
Huh.
And so I
That's
found that like
interesting.
to be so heartbreaking, because
Yeah.
because with audiobook in particular, it's a question of access, right? Like, and it's being ableist, because there are some children who are, just can only learn through audio, auditory
Yeah. And
ways. And so,
yeah. And especially a book in verse, it would just sound so beautiful in in an audiobook. So that's
yeah, it was,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so people were asking if I have a teacher's guide. Yes. The wonderful Carla España, she's a professor of education. She wrote she developed a teacher's guide, and it's on my website. And I'm going to throw up the link right now. Uh, I'll throw up the link right now, where in a little bit. How about another question?
So somebody has a question, Miranda. With
Mhm,
the ongoing global tragedy right now, I'm finding it
mhm,
hard to believe that my project, which features a kid with OCD dealing with the traumatic death of a parent, is even worth writing right now. I feel like this generation of young people is already going to be so traumatized. And in particular, there's going to be lots of kids dealing with heightened OCD. And those are absolutely the kids I'm writing for. But a part of me thinks I should just throw it all away and write a fun book about dragons or something. Any advice on how we can continue telling these difficult stories in the midst of what's going on in the world now?
mhm, mhm. Well, I have a little bit to say there. Two things. One, you got to write the story. You cannot um, abandon a story because of what the market says, and what the situation says. Tell your story. Tell it with all the conviction and passion and beauty that you can muster. Write a story, um, and write your dragon story as well, right? because
Right.
because you have more than one book in you. That's not your only book. And it may or may not be the time for that book, or it may or may not be the time for that book. But you shouldn't let that stop you. That said, I was just in a conversation with my agent, who told me that nobody wants to buy anything that's too dark right now. That's what's happening. Like, they're looking for rom-coms, they're looking for, lighter, funny, fantasy, escapist books, because the weight of the world is so difficult. But that's not true for every
Yeah.
reader.
Yeah.
I would say.
That's true. And also, when you think about it, the publishing industry, it moves at such a slow, slow pace that,
Mhm.
you write a book today, it's not going to get published for another 2 or 3 years anyway. And then what's going to be happening then? So it just seems to me that you should be writing the stories that are inside of you, and whether they're dark stories or light stories, just write them all. And they'll find their readers when those readers are ready to be found. That's what I think.
Mhm. Right.
So Miranda's also weighing in on the middle grade versus YA question, and she works
Mhm.
in publishing. YA tends to focus more on an individual journey, whereas middle grade often digs into a character's relationship within a family or a community. It doesn't have to, but that's one thing I really love about middle grade. There's also more opportunity in middle grade to develop the adult characters in relation to the child main character. Okay, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I do feel like the reason why I write middle grade is that I really like middle grade books. I enjoy reading them more than reading YA books, because YA books it does seem to me that middle grade books tend to be deeper than YA books, which are more focused on the one main character. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but sometimes it does seem that way when I read them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Any more questions?
I think that's it, right?
Let's see. Give a second for people to formulate their questions. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to put up a second here. This is where you can find. This is where you can find our books. Here is our. You can find our books at Las Musas. You know, if you don't know, there's a shop. There's a website that's not Amazon that is supporting new indie bookstores, and it's called bookshop.org. And it's not letting me, for some reason. It's not, well, here. I'm
Maybe type it in the
just put
comments.
it in because it's not.
Yeah,
I'll just put it in the tab. There you go. And you can buy our books and pre-order if you want. Yeah, you see it? I hope you see it. Anyway, thank you all so much for stopping by and chatting with us. And I hope that the weight of the world isn't too much. I think that we need to write through it, lean into it. And as I said on Twitter, James Baldwin said that the only way to get over your fear of fire is to walk right into it. And I really believe that, especially when it comes to children. It's one of the most revolutionary things that we can be doing is to be supporting young readers at this time.
Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to us. And I hope you learned something, and keep writing.
That's right. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Bye. This will be up in Las Musas YouTube channel. So if you missed part of it or want to see more of all of the many offerings Las Musas are giving, go there. All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.